This is China's Jiangling River, running dry because of record heat and drought that the country is facing. Just to show the true effect of this video, here's how the river looked before the drought. Recently, China's property woes, bank crisis, and foreign policy towards Taiwan have become hot topics on this channel and in the news media. It's easy to think this triad constitutes China's most significant problem. But no, there's another deadly crisis that threatens the eastern nation as we know it. That is the water crisis. The current water crisis that China is facing might possibly be the biggest threat the country has on its hands. How bad is it, you ask? Well, it's this bad.
One of the worst drought seasons.
A record-breaking drought.
China's record heat wave and drought.
Hydropower reservoirs are currently down by as much as half. Emergency measures to save electricity have come into effect.
With insufficient irrigation, crops here are dying. More than 350,000 people in rural Chongqing are suffering because of a shortage of water supplies.
Let's dive more into detail on China's dry spell and the CCP's role in worsening the situation. The truth that the CCP has hidden for many years but is now coming to light as an unavoidable catastrophe is that China is on the brink of collapse due to a water crisis. On top of internal incompetence by government officials, a multi-year drought, the worst China has seen in years, threatens to topple the country's already COVID-pummeled economy. Water has always been a big factor to look out for in China, and that is more apparent now than ever. According to the United Nations, though China is home to 21% of the world's population, it contains only 7% of the world's fresh water supplies. Ironically, most of these water supplies are located in southern China and not in its northern part where most of the population lives. At first, this might seem like a minuscule problem. It's just water after all, one might say. But as a former British diplomat and China expert Charlie Part noted in 2018, China can print money, but they can't print water. It's either you have it or you don't. And, well, China doesn't have it. This is quite a problem for a nation that currently consumes 10 billion barrels of water per day. For comparison's sake, this is about 700 times its daily oil consumption. Yeah, let that sink in. One could arguably say water has been the silent hero behind China's decades of explosive economic growth, as it is essential for growing food, generating energy, and sustaining humanity. With as big an industrial sector as China has, this shortage of water is slowing down the economy and resulting in the closure of essential plants all over the nation. All this will serve to lower the forecasts on China's already meager growth predictions, further pushing the country into a full-blown recession. Now, with the drought and heat wave in full force, not only China but the United States and the rest of the world are likely to feel the effects of China's troubles. This is because, as the rivers and lakes dry out and the heat wave continues, that condition is going to have a significant effect on China's food and power production. Moreover, given China's scale as the second largest global power, this situation could also induce global food and industrial materials shortages on a far greater scale than we've ever seen in recent times. Given the country's overriding importance to the global economy, potential water-driven disruptions beginning in China would rapidly reverberate through food, energy, and material markets around the world and create economic and political turbulence for years to come. So yes, even you in the United States might end up being affected by Chinese droughts. To make the situation worse, the underground water supply simply can't help the thirsty population. A 2018 analysis of surface water by China's Ministry of Ecology and Environment found that 19% was classified as unfit for human consumption, and roughly 7% was unfit for any use at all. The quality of groundwater, which is critical for ensuring water supplies during droughts like the one China is currently facing, is worse. Over 30% of China's underground water is deemed unfit for human consumption, and 16% is deemed unfit for any use at all. Data from the UN Food and Agricultural Organization indicates that China uses nearly 2.5 times as much fertilizer and 4 times as much pesticides as the United States does, despite having 25% less arable land. A new study finds chemicals are often used inefficiently on small farms in China. Land and migration policies may help explain why the country uses 30% of the world's fertilizers and pesticides on 9% of global cropland. This could potentially have played a role in polluting their underground reservoirs. Where the CCP falls at fault is that for decades, Beijing has generally chosen to conceal the full extent of China's environmental problems to limit potential public backlash. In avoiding questions relating to their competence, the CCP has let the country fall into ruin. This lack of transparency, on top of droughts that China now faces, has resulted in the current mess. When we look at this water crisis scenario, it presents itself as 2 large problems in one. What makes it worse is that they spill from China's borders to the whole world. Let's run through them.
This year, extreme heat has severely damaged crops in India. Crop yields are falling globally, and there are more dire predictions.
Nearly 830 million people around the world went hungry in 2021. That's up nearly 50 million the year before.
Scorched, you see, certainly cannot grow. The high temperature is slowly roasting the sweet potato leaves to death.
China is taking emergency action, but the leaves and stems continue to die.
The first and most obvious problem that is likely to be faced is there's going to be a food crisis in the absence of water resources. A quick look into Chinese history reveals that famines due to droughts have helped topple at least 5 of China's 17 dynasties. This is because hunger and food shortages tend to remove whatever inhibitors people may have. Fully aware of this, the CCP has heavily emphasized maximizing grain production to ensure food security. This has resulted in policies where the government incentivizes farmers to maximize the production of corn, rice, and wheat to achieve self-sufficiency levels. The problem is, to sustain these harvests, farms and cities are pumping water far faster than nature can replenish it. Satellite data suggests that each year between 2003 and 2010, North China lost an amount of groundwater equal to more than twice of what Beijing consumes annually. And yes, that's a lot of water. As groundwater levels fall, many farmers are struggling to find new resources. Some are digging larger, deeper wells, often at a great cost. But continual overdraws may render water physically inaccessible, regardless of the pumper's willingness to spend on deeper wells and new pumping technology. Add to that the fact that underground water in China is contaminated and unsuitable, and the problem becomes even bigger. This could lead to a whole food crisis. Statistics show that if the North China Plain were to suffer a 33% crop loss because of water insufficiency, China would potentially need to compensate by importing approximately 20% of the world's internationally traded corn and 13% of its traded wheat. Typically, this would cause an imbalance in food imports globally, but such a scenario is not out of the realm of possibility, considering that a drought in early 2022 slashed Argentina's expected corn crop by 33%. To add to the problems, if the Chinese drought increases and affects the rice yields in southern China or Heilongjiang, it could create even larger market shocks given China's disproportionate share of rice consumption. And this is particularly so because all 3 major staple grains are critical for hundreds of millions of lower-income consumers worldwide. In previous videos, I've covered how China is already hoarding a large amount of the world's grain supply. If the water crisis and the drought persist, however, even with their stores, China could still be subjected to a multi-year yield shortfall. Such a scenario would result in China increasing its imports of grain from the global markets. As we witnessed when they hoarded the grain they now already have, such an action could trigger food price spikes in high-income countries. This would lead to shortages in those countries, resulting in widespread hunger globally. Also, as China buys up reserves to compensate for the shortfalls at home, they will render a lot of basics inaccessible to hundreds of millions of people in poorer countries. who can't afford a global food price war. As I've mentioned before, though the drought is in China and the water crisis is a failure on the CCP's part, the effects of this are going to be global. With China focusing on the preservation of its people, it seems the world is the one that is going to foot the bill for China's misfortunes. In particular, the poorer countries in the world. Furthermore, China's water crisis isn't only limited to its agricultural sector. No. It reaches beyond to affect other sectors as well. Maybe even in a bigger capacity. Let's take a look at that.
The provinces in China's northeast are suffering some of the country's worst power cuts, with cities plunged into darkness lasting hours.
Shanghai is switching off the lights along its famous Bund riverfront.
Power crunch in some parts of China has shut down factories and left some households without electricity.
Factories that are suppliers to companies like Tesla, big polysilicon makers for solar panels, big lithium battery makers for EVs, they've had to reduce or shut down production because of this.
China has the largest energy sector in the world. With the kind of population China has and the size of its industrial sector, this doesn't come as a surprise. The challenge is that a lot of this power is hydroelectric, meaning they capitalize on the larger quantities of water to generate electricity. Even the other stations that take advantage of nuclear power also require water to cool reactor cores and used fuel rods. This is why almost all the Chinese power stations are built on banks of large water bodies, or at least somewhere close where they can easily access large water quantities. Now, with the rivers and lakes drying up due to the drought, most of these power stations have been forced to shut down, as they can no longer operate. Amidst the mortgage, property, and Taiwan crisis, this is only serving to show the weakness of the CCP. If China keeps closing down factories, and it loses just 15% of its hydropower production in a year because of low water levels behind dams, it would have to increase electricity output by an equal amount to what Egypt generates in a year to compensate. The only way to do that would be to use coal-fired plants. This will have the intended short-term effects, but in the long run, it will roll back their environmental progress and further increase the same contamination that has ruined their underground receivers. Oh, and did I mention just how water-intensive coal mining is? And you really can't have a running coal plant with limited coal now, can you? It's a losing situation however you look at it. This reduction in power output in China has the citizens feeling the brunt of the impact the most. This is causing anger, because amidst a heat wave, the government has chosen to limit electricity supply to the masses and even close factories like those of Toyota. People can barely use air conditioning systems. Beijing has, however, given special preferences to Tesla by allowing them to continue operating at capacity at the expense of their citizens. Something that the people aren't too happy about.
We cannot live through this summer without air conditioning.
Yeah, it's hot as hell. I'm melting.
It could affect residents and those that need to use the water.
Power crunch in some parts of China has shut down factories.
China does not have enough power to keep its factories running.
How did Tesla manage to get what it wanted in terms of its foray into China?
Wanted to be at the forefront of electric vehicles, made China more willing to negotiate with Tesla and to give them their terms.
When you consider that, at present, China is by far the world's largest producer of aluminum, ferrosilicon, lead, manganese, magnesium, zinc, most rare earth materials, and many other specialty metals and materials, you will see that there is an incoming problem. Power outages in even a single region can move global markets, a fact that Europe car makers discovered in late 2021 when power shortages curtailed magnesium smelter operations in Shanxi province, responsible for about 50% of global output. As magnesium inventories plummeted, prices spiked to 7 times their normal level at the beginning of the year, causing global problems in supply. Now, with all these key components at risk of a limited supply due to China's problems, there are likely going to be global supply chain challenges, as industrial facilities account for over 65% of electricity use in China. Blackouts by decree would disrupt several key material supplies, as we have already begun to see with the closure of factories. it is setting itself up as quite the great pending global catastrophe. Chinese officials are not oblivious to the direness of the disaster they have on their hands. The government, back in 2003, even launched the $60 billion South to North Water Transfer Project, which draws water from tributaries of the Yangtze River to replenish the dry north. This was part of a scheme to draw water from the south of China, where most of the freshwater supplies are, to bring it to northern China, where most of the population lives. In addition, they've also deployed aircrafts and rockets to lace clouds with silver iodide, or liquid nitrogen, a process known as cloud seeding to boost rainfall. Other measures like relocating heavy industry away from the most water-stressed regions, along with massive investments in water management infrastructure, have been taken as well. In April of this year, the Vice Minister of Water Resources, Wei Xianxiong, estimated that annual investment in water-related projects could hit $100 billion. This shows the kind of effort that is being put into trying to solve the problem. However, in the face of the drought being faced, all this seems to be for naught. The harsh truth is that China's potential way out of this predicament is bounded by harsh economic, physical, and political realities. Economic solutions like the desalinization of water are proving too expensive, with very little to show for it. Physical solutions like the transfer of water from the south to the north are nigh impossible and also very expensive. Maybe above all of this, the CCP wants to protect its political power and image. Certain measures, though potentially effective, if they harm the CCP's preferred narrative of economic progress, are completely ruled out. At some point, the lines between maintaining power and actually improving citizens' lives are blurred. The whole world now waits to see what becomes of China's situation. And if the situation persists, then it will be clear that the rest of the world is on a deadline too.